Hello and a very warm welcome to this programme. Extinction Rebellion, XR to its friends, is leading a campaign that appears to have captured attention worldwide, mixing civil disobedience with eye-catching stunts. In the battle to change minds about our changing world, have they found a winning formula? Welcome to Roundtable. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. From gluing themselves to planes to playing dead at London Fashion Week, among other things, Extinction Rebellion supporters have found creative ways, it must be said, to get their messages across. But there's always the danger of turning the public away from your cause.
Non-violent civil disobedience protests have been a hallmark of previous campaigns for change, from Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi's peaceful sit-in protests to the bus boycotts of the US civil rights movement. And now Extinction Rebellion is blocking roads in London, New York, Sydney, Amsterdam and other cities. XR, as its supporters call it, is an international movement that calls on governments to take urgent action on climate change, to curb carbon emissions by 2025, halt mass extinction and prevent social collapse. Their non-violent civil disobedience stunts include spraying fake blood at the UK Treasury, blocking New York's Times Square with a sit-in, to burying their heads in sand in Australia. Police have arrested hundreds of protesters globally, which the group sees as a protest success. It's led others to view Extinction Rebellion as a nuisance and an obstruction to public order, including British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
My own team didn't want me to come to this event tonight because they said that there were some uncooperative crusties and protesters of all kinds littering the road.
London's police have tried to ban further protests by the group, but the climate protesters have promised to continue their mass civil disobedience campaign in the capital and around the world.
Let us start the conversation. We have Robin Ellis-Cockcroft with us, Extinction Rebellion youth organiser, Zack Polanski here too, Green Party parliamentary candidate who has fallen foul of the law in all of this. Shabnam Nasimi, Conservative Party campaigner and charity consultant, and on the line from Sussex University in the south of England, Dr. Pollyanna Ruiz, senior lecturer in media and communications. And Pollyanna, you study mass protests. Do you think this one's working?
I think it probably is working. I mean, it depends a bit on how you define that. But if we think that they're successfully creating spaces, both in the media and on the street, in which people are talking about the issues which have prompted people to act, I would say it has been quite successful within those terms, yes. OK, and we'll come to you in a little while to talk about the tactics of other groups as well. But Robin, let me put this to you. The police banning Extinction Rebellion from the streets of London, saying these protests have to end, may well have done you a favour, because people were starting to get incredibly hacked off with what was going on.
Yes, I think a big part of how Extinction Rebellion operates and a big part of the non-violence of the protest is about trying to trigger negative reactions from the police that engender public support. Like, that's clearly in there, and I think the police shutting down these peaceful protests is going to engender public support because it is obviously unfair. I've got young people this morning who I work with who have been arrested for simply wanting to go and watch their friends in a protest.
Can I just say, you just said to me, deliberately provoking negative tactics from the police. In other words, you're provoking them.
That's what mass arrest is about. That's how it works as a non-violent tactic. So you're always sitting down in the road, we're demanding a space, as Pollyanna has said, to create conversation, to bring this, the consciousness raising around the climate and ecological crisis. And when we are shut down by the authorities, then it's clear to see that what we're trying to do is just have a conversation, and what they're trying to do is stop us from having this conversation.
You're also stopping them from doing their job, which is presumably most of the time to stop crime and violence and other misdemeanours against the public.
Yes, but one of our fundamental rights is the right to protest, which the police are supposed to support activists in having, and anyone in the public from having, keeping them to have the right to protest. So, yes, I think we don't want to be taking all of that police time away from other things they could be doing. I mean, for me, there's lots of difficulties about what the police do in other spaces that I think we could talk about at length, but in terms of whether we're, like, annoying the public too much, possibly. I mean, disruption is an annoying tactic. It's part of the process of what we're trying to do. when you're trying to knock people out of comfort zones. You know, our society is very good at putting people into comfort zones. Like, that's part of how capitalism and everything works, to make sure that people are kind of sedate and going along with everything. And disruption is about saying to people, no, there's something coming down the pipeline that we can't deal with. There's something we're not ready for.
Is that what you were trying to do?
I think I would...
Because you've been arrested, right?
Yes, I have.
Robin, you haven't yet. But...
Sadly not.
I think it's a little bit simpler, actually. We're facing a climate and ecological emergency, as we know from the IPCC report, the Interparliamentary Panel on Climate Change. We've got 12 years to turn things around. Government and Parliament are failing us. We do have a democratic emergency as well. We're simply not being represented. So as someone running for office and someone who's been doing that for a relatively long time in various different guises, I think it's important that actually when things aren't working, if you massively need the media attention to be able to say to the government, see, the public care about this. And we have an Ipsos poll that went from 53% of people saying that climate change was their biggest issue to something, I think it was 78%. That's a massive, big jump. So as Pollyanna said, on its own terms, this has been successful. Now, you say the police have done us a favour by shutting it down. I don't think that's true. It's a rebellion. The clue's in the title. They haven't shut anything down. They've simply said that there's certain places we can't go, and we'll choose to continue to ignore those requests, because actually the fact that we're facing an existential crisis is more important than Sadiq Khan or whoever authorised this saying that we can't go there.
Shabnam, why do you call them the Extinction Rebellion itself, but also the other affinity groups, as they call themselves? Why do you call them cult-like followings?
Because firstly, the banning of the Extinction Rebellion's protests recently has shown us, and actually begs the question, why has it not been done sooner? The police resources and time have been wasted.
No, first of all,
yes.
Why are you referring to them as being like members of a cult?
Because very recently, having travelled across central London throughout the protests, their narrative of an alternative way of life segregates and alienates other communities, other diverse communities on the agenda on climate change. I've seen them...
So you're saying it's not just about another way of life in terms of no longer living on a poisoned planet, as they see it. It's about another way of life in terms of total lifestyle changes from every single person out there, because that's what a cult is, a group of people that follow one particular directive.
Absolutely, and I think one of the challenges that comes with the protests and the people associated is it's not diverse. It's a group of white, privileged protesters who are well off in many respects, protesting and asking for people to give up their livelihoods, give up driving, give up travelling, when actually it's the wealthiest we should be campaigning to stop using, private jets to travel across the world. We're asking the working class, who probably get a holiday per year, to stop travelling using airplanes. Livelihoods today is mainly used through social media, through technology.
But don't we all have to make some sacrifices if we want to achieve something?
And I'm not disputing the concept and the agenda on climate change, and that we need to improve the way we use our resources, to how we improve our environment for future generations. It's the mechanism and the tactic that they're using that I don't agree with.
So let's go to Pollyanna, then we'll throw it open and you can say whatever you want to whoever you would like to say it. Your book, Articulating Dissent. Explain where this one is working and other protests haven't really worked.
I think what this protest is doing, and what it's doing very successfully, is drawing on the experience of previous generations of protest. So it's taking a range of strategies and tactics from, say, civil disobedience, which is being used extensively by the civil rights movement in America, and also the use of affinity groups, which were used very extensively by the anti-globalization movement. So what it's done really, really well is to look back at history, look at the different strategies and tactics that have worked well, and select those and put them together in a way that really responds to the moment we are in now. So
it all sounds extremely well organised. You do this, Robin, as a full-time job at the moment. There are notes here that the Extinction Rebellion's paid out at least £200,000 to activists since the start of the scheme. The co-leader, Gail Bradbrook, was asked for payments of £600 a month this year. It's taken on ironically, a sort of business-like proportion.
There's a lot of money involved now. It's not something that I necessarily agree with. I haven't taken any money personally from Extinction Rebellion. The house I live in with a bunch of other young people down in Bristol is rented by Extinction Rebellion, and we use it as an open space for organising and for working and those kind of things. Where the money comes from is a contentious issue right now within Extinction Rebellion and a lot of the circles, and it's something that we're constantly working at and looking at, because if you start taking money from certain places, then it becomes difficult to also have critiques of those places.
Radiohead, I've read was
Radiohead. I don't have any particular critique of Radiohead. I think it's great that they might give us money. They probably do go on planes, but equally, lots of other people go on planes who really deserve it.
I think it's worth pointing out that that money doesn't have to be seen negatively. You were talking before about who is included and who's excluded in Extinction Rebellion. And being able to pay some people some money actually means that protesting isn't just a privilege of those who already have an income, who are able to take time out from their jobs, from working in order to do that. So I think there is an argument to be made that having carefully managed small amounts of money opens up a movement to make it more inclusive and more diverse.
OK, Shabnam, I'll get you to reply to that in a moment, if I may. But, Zack, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, it was really the point that Pollyanna just made, but to add to it, there was so much that Shabnam said that I disagreed with. But to start with consensus, I agreed that the movement does have to diversify. So when I look at the movement and it is predominantly white, it often is middle class. Not exclusively, and I think that's an important distinction. Of course, though, when you get large groups of people, there's always going to be some ethnic diversity. So XR aren't doing good enough. I think, though, saying that you have to fund yourself to be able to protest on this thing does exclude people from that conversation. So I don't have a huge problem with those sums of money that are being quoted. They're not radically huge sums of money, and I think if someone's going to dedicate their time and energy to making sure they're doing something productive for the wider good, then it makes sense that they're not rewarded for it, but they can live with it.
Did you see this tweet put out by Extinction Rebellion that was later deleted about if you get arrested, if you go to prison? This sort of rather backs up the suggestion that it's perhaps rather middle class and a little bit woolly, touchy-feely sort of thing. If you get solitary, there's plenty of time for meditation. You can request a vegetarian or vegan diet, and you can take as many naps as you want.
Absolutely absurd tweet. And what is absurd as well is people saying, you know, you've got to get arrested. For me, Extinction Rebellion isn't about being arrested. That's not the #1 thing you can do. Because that is a privilege that some black people and other people of ethnic minorities can't have because they fear police brutality. However...
It also said, oh, by the way, you'll like it in prison because the majority of prison guards are black, but,
right.
Which they aren't.
Which is also a huge problem. However, I think it's worth pointing out, though, that if someone isn't fearful of the police or they don't fear police brutality, they almost have a duty, or at least we could lean on them to say, if you are willing to be arrested because you care about this enough, then you're the person who should step forward because you're representing lots of people who don't have that privilege. You can't do that. So I think there's a complicated question about privilege. Just for the last thing that Shabnam said, was I think there's an important distinction here between personal change and systemic change. I can speak for the Green Party, Robin can speak for Extinction Rebellion. From the Green Party, so I'm vegan, I ride a bike, but it's not about telling people what to do. This is about calling on government, institutions and corporations to say, you are where the power is, you can change and you can make the difference. Now, of course, as individuals, we can say through consumer power, I'm not going to buy that, I'm going to buy this, and people will respond. But ultimately, as politicians and as activists, it's our job to call on those people with power to say, use your power for good, use your power to protect the climate.
Would you go on the streets to protest?
Well, as a Conservative campaigner, I do agree that we need to lobby and pressurise leaders and parliamentarians towards a certain cause.
He says that's not working there.
No, it does work. Whether it's the
whether it's
the climate change,
and it's not changing anything.
I think, I mean, just like when you lose trust in a system, doesn't mean you give up voting. Leadership and governments do change. We just need to...
But can I ask you, would you go on a protest march? And if your answer is yes, where would you draw the line? You would never, ever feel the need?
On a protest, yes. Yeah. Yes, a peaceful protest. One that does not block roads and cause carnage across London, does not impact people's livelihoods, does not use up resources, timely police resources that could be used on other issues. I mean, just last week we had a few young people being murdered. Police should have been available across...
There is not a single protest that involves a large number of people that wouldn't involve the authorities of some kind, unless you happen to be a lone rambler protesting about the right to walk across a particular field.
Well, it's actually the agenda of the Extinction Rebellion that I actually dispute as well. They are asking for carbon emissions to be reduced to net zero by 2025. That's less than 6 years away.
2050 is the UK government's stated target.
That is not realistic. We are asking for, if that does take place, factories need to be closed, industries need to be shut down. People need to stop driving completely. And to some extent, I actually feel one of the reasons I dispute the agenda is it seems to be targeting the working class, working people, and the third world even more. I mean, I think one of the one thing that they're selling is that Africa is on fire. I don't know about you, but I think it's quite obnoxious for a group of white protesters to say that Africa's on fire and use that as a symbol of why we should be protesting against climate change.
There are a great many groups involved in this, what are known as affinity groups. And I don't want to get into he said, she said type of argument. But I would like to go back to you, Pollyanna. You talk about the working class. There was a candlelit vigil at Smithfield Market. For those that don't know, it's Britain's biggest meat market, fairly recently. And it was called Animals Who Lost Their Lives. And there was a chap whose job was to collect the bones. What he did with them, I don't know, who said, you give us an alternative, we'll come out and do it. But this is not an alternative. This is just putting people out of work. Pollyanna, my original contention was that this group had come pretty close to alienating people, but had almost been saved by the very forces that they said were stopping them from their protest. How difficult is it to draw that kind of line?
I think it's an incredibly difficult line to be drawn. So there's a kind of line between being a kind of disruptive force, which is kind of taking away from society as a whole, and a disruptive force that is actually contributing to society and trying to change it. And I think protest movements are constantly treading a line where they need to be seen, they need to resist the tendency for them to be portrayed in the media as violent or as kind of crazy. And they need to, at the same time, keep the media's attention. So to be interesting, but not easily classified as violent or crazy.
You see, I'm wondering about somebody like Greta Thunberg, 16 years old, caught the world's attention, addressed the United Nations, declared by a particular church in Sweden, her home country, as being the successor to Jesus. She's got built up so much that, in a sense, she's become, if not a figure of fun, then one of some certain amount of derision, despite what she's saying. And for her to be associated necessarily with this rebellion is not always necessarily a good thing.
For her personally, or for the rebellion?
For the rebellion.
I think there
comes a time when she's too much baggage.
I think there's a much deeper question there to just ask about celebrity culture. Like, why has Greta... So we work a lot with young people around the world. A lot of Indigenous young people have been saying very similar things to Greta for a long time. What Greta's saying and what she's using as her platform as a young white woman from the global north is incredible. That's part of the reason why it's been picked up so much, and it's also part of why I think Extinction Rebellion is so powerful. But there have been young people saying these words for a long time all around the world, and I think one of the movements now within especially youth climate activism is to recognise those voices. I know Greta's doing it herself and is starting to give her platform alongside her to young black and brown activists, to Indigenous activists who are raising similar issues.
You don't think that her involvement will in any way ever be a hindrance?
I think if she understands how the media and the world is trying to turn her into this kind of special person who is and use that narrative that only
the media turning her into a gorgon almost.
Yeah, only like these unique figures are able to change things, rather than understanding that, like, yes, Martin Luther King was instrumental in the civil rights movement, but it was the people on the streets who changed the country. Then it's the young people who go to these school strikes around the world who are changing the narrative. And Greta is a figurehead for them, and what she's actively trying to do, which is bring more people alongside her to represent the young people across the world, I think that's really powerful.
Zack, I know you wanted to say something, but you mentioned, Robin, Martin Luther King there, and I noticed in our producer's notes that you likened some of this to Martin Luther King and also to Mahatma Gandhi.
And the suffragettes.
But this is overblowing it, is it not?
I don't think so. If anything, it's underblowing it. We're talking about an existential crisis to the
planet.
Well,
we're talking about one person who was assassinated, another person, well, two of them who were assassinated, laid their lives on the line for all of this. That hasn't happened here, has it?
It hasn't happened, and I don't think it's about, we can respect the sacrifices they made, but this isn't kind of a hierarchy of sacrifice. This is about a mass movement of people saying we care about it. And to come to Shabnam's point again, no, I don't think it's hype at all. And something I think is interesting is a decade ago, Caroline Lucas came up with the Green New Deal.
She's your party leader.
Exactly. Well, not party leader,
For those that don't understand.
Sean Berry's the party leader, co-leader. Caroline Lucas is the sole Green MP.
Okay.
And Caroline Lucas came up with the Green New Deal. I wasn't around in politics at the time, but I don't think it got much traction other than out of Green circles. Now it's getting loads of traction, and actually the Labour Party are jumping on it too, and I applaud that because we need one. But this answers a lot of Shabnam's worries and concerns, which I hear about industries closing or about the changes that we need to make. Because actually we need to look at environmentalism and the climate catastrophe as actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to make green new industries. It's an opportunity to give people new jobs, to train people, to make a vision of a greener Britain. So this isn't about scaring people or doom-mongering. It's not up to one person, and this comes back to your question, to say this is the way. This is about us all coming together, which is where Extinction Rebellion Citizens Assembly is an idea that I endorse very much, saying groups of people should come together, a bit like a jury, through sortition, and say, what is a Britain that looks like, that includes everyone? What's a Britain that embraces ethnic diversity, that embraces class, and crucially deals with the political emergency, the climate and ecological emergency?
And would the Citizens Assembly, by virtue of its inclusiveness, include right-wing extremists?
Potentially. So it would be randomly selecting people. Now, I don't like right-wing extremists, obviously, but I still think that we should engage in conversation. In fact, I've been on shows recently with Julie Hartley-Brewer. She's not a right-wing extremist, but she certainly is a climate change denier.
And we've just done a programme about no platforming and free speech. So, Robin, let me put this one to you. You say you have 3 key demands. I don't want you to go into the full manifesto. We don't have the time for that. And that you would like to meet the government to talk about these demands. What have you heard back? What has been the echo from Westminster on this?
So far, so we've got a couple of young people who I work with who are part of this government liaison team that's put together. So there's again, using this like participatory thing. So lots of the groups have come down. We've formed a team about how to liaise with the government. So far, from this current government, we've heard very little. Obviously, the government before and the protests in April, we heard far more back. The climate emergency was declared. A lot moved forwards, and since then, literally nothing has happened. The government haven't put in any real policies to change things. They had a tokenistic people, all-party parliamentary group, or however, was formed. But we haven't heard anything back this time. And that means we're just going to continue. I totally agree with Zack. Like, the idea is that what we're here is demanding people's rights to have a voice in the democratic process, and that's coming back. On the 3 demands, I think a really important thing that we've been working at the site I've been at, which is the Global Justice Rebellion site, which is all about, and I do agree with what Shabnam said about diversity and the need to put Extinction Rebellion within a much wider framework of activism. You talk about people not having laid their lives on the line. Like, I'm working with indigenous groups who day in, day out are forced to lay their lives on the line. They are part of the climate change movement as much as I am. They're part of the land rights movement, the environmental movement, and they are connected to this in many ways.
Would you lay your life on the line?
Would I lay my life on the line?
Yeah.
I think, yes. If the time came that I would need to do that and I felt like it was really going to benefit things, then yes, I would.
It's probably also worth saying that air pollution in London is so high that everyone is laying their life on the line effectively every time we go out.
Not really, no.
Not really. No.
I haven't got much time. We've got to give Shabnam. Don't go into air pollution in London.
I didn't even talk about demands.
No, I said you can't lay out the manifesto. I asked if you were meeting the government. We've only got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Shabnam, look, they say they're not going away and that it's going to continue in this vein. Any chance you could mollify, change your views on this and say, well, actually, one day I think I ought to go out with them?
No. Climate change is a global goal. And what I see is that it's been simplified into a narrow way of, an alternative way of living that alienates much of British society. And to some respect, I actually agree with Zack that it needs to be a cross-party initiative for any real change to happen when it comes to climate change and the environment, and ensuring that we build resilient communities where each family, each neighbourhood, each community feels responsible for their area. It needs to be, whether you're from the left or the right or, a Green Party activists, we need to have a shared vision. And right now, that is lacking.
I'm going to go to Pollyanna to summarise this, because if you go back to the Vietnam War, if you go back to Martin Luther King with black civil rights and the protests about what was happening in Southeast Asia, would it be right for the protesters there to say that at least some of their goals were achieved, and therefore how would Extinction Rebellion, do you think, define success?
I think success needs to be looked at over the long term. So if you look back at those movements that you were talking about, success didn't come in a single kind of cataclysmic moment where suddenly the world was different. It came slowly, it came accumulative over a period of small battles, small wins, small gains. And so I think it would be very hard now to say whether Extinction Rebellion is a success or a failure. It might be hard in 5 years or 10 years' time to say. But I also think that it's very important not to measure these movements in terms of their immediate success in that way, simply by provoking these conversations, by the fact that we're all here talking about climate change now, is a success of sorts, and it will progress debate and enable our kind of collective vision of what we should do to evolve and hopefully achieve something in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. It's gone far too quickly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shabnam.
Thank you very much.
Pollyanna, appreciate it. Zach, Robin, great to have you on the programme. I hope you feel you've got some of your message across. Sorry I had to keep on interrupting, but you've got to move it along a little bit, just as you're trying to move the debate along. Thank you for watching this edition of Roundtable. It is time for us to say goodbye. It is the end for us. Let us hope it is not for those who want to save the world in one way or another. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.